Black Sheep Shipping presents Christmas Year Round. Content warnings can be found in the description.
What do you want from me? You want a story? Is that it? Okay. Don't come any closer. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Annie. And Annie, she had a special job. Okay, yes, her job was to find people. And she was good at it. Very, very good at it. She was so good that they'd bring her all the way from America to the UK. One day, she was sent to a tiny village in the northern English countryside. It was called Dunbar. A more Irish-sounding name, Annie thought. But she went there anyway. You see, usually Annie was told that one person went missing and she was sent to find them. She had a name, a job, lots to go on. She could talk to their friends, their family, their coworkers, and put together what happened, like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. But this time, it wasn't just one person Annie had to look for. It was a whole bunch of people. Well, 7, to be exact, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider the locale, Dunbar was a sleepy village that hadn't experienced any violent crime in something like 54 years. Yet here it was, trapped in this epidemic of people disappearing. All sorts of different demographics. Old ladies, little boys. No rhyme or reason to it. Some of them even went missing after going to look for who went missing. It was a lot. Too much. Too many leads. Too hard to narrow down what happened. But Annie was trusted with it anyway, and she knew that if she could figure something out, she'd be rewarded with a really big, present. So she went off to Dunbar, even though she hates being in England, and she hates humid weather, and she hates these tiny towns full of mouth-breathing villagers who squint at her and ask how things are coming along. On the drive there, Annie heard something strange. Even though it was the middle of July and Annie was listening to the news, something briefly interrupted her. It was fuzzy Christmas music, cutting in and out for a few moments. Annie was already annoyed enough to hear Christmas music as early as October, but hearing it during the hottest summer England ever experienced was downright surreal. Annie went to the police station to check in, as she always does first thing in small villages like this. Since the first thing these country bumpkins usually do when seeing someone new is to let the local Bobby know of some kind of suspicious activity. They were somehow more unhelpful than she was expecting, remaining tight-lipped about the disappearances. Supposedly, they had a bad experience with a true crime documentary crew a few years back, who shot B-roll of their town despite the subject of their film being from another village entirely. If Annie had to guess, She'd say that they were trying to avoid putting their charming village on the map for such a morbid reason. After all, a quarter of the population suddenly getting raptured doesn't reflect too well on the efficacy of the local law enforcement. Annie had to imagine. Beyond a list of names and a vague timeline of events Annie had already pieced together herself, they told Annie they'd already done all they could and were too busy to continue the investigation. Annie thought they looked like they had plenty of free time, but that was fine. Incompetent dolts like that only ever get in the way anyways. After that, Annie actually managed to get into contact with a family member of one of these missing villagers, who agreed to meet with her on the condition that they do so at a pub, the Elephant's Foot. Of course. Annie asked the bartender if it was a play on the Chernobyl disaster, but he had no idea what she was talking about. When Annie got there, suddenly the gentleman didn't feel like talking all that much. His name was Kevin Bosch, a mole rat-looking guy with a great big bald head that glistened as he spoke. He was the father of James Bosch, the latest one to go missing, a 39-year-old man who took it upon himself to go looking for some of the other missing persons, only to end up vanishing himself. He left the house at 6:47 p.m. to check some old access road not marked on any GPS, and then just vanished. The cops said they already combed the area and came up with nothing. Annie made a note of where this road was supposed to be and bookmarked it for later, but Kevin didn't feel like saying much more than that. He spent the rest of the time complaining about his neighbors, moaning and groaning about the unsightly state of their home and how poorly it reflected on the rest of the neighborhood. Annie managed to smile and nod long enough to find an opening in his long-winded complaints to excuse herself and slip out of the sticky pub, continue her investigation. Annie meant to head straight to that access road next, while she still had daylight. But while driving around town, something caught her eye. Nestled in between an ice cream parlor and a secondhand bookstore, a cute-looking storefront labeled Christmas Year-Round. Annie remembered the music, and she was intrigued. She felt something pulling her towards it, like a magnet. Like something lurking in that store was critical to the investigation. Why did I? Oh, okay, yes. Back to the story. Annie went into Christmas Year-Round and was surprised to see a woman in a hijab at the counter, pricing knickknacks while minding the empty store. She seemed friendly enough, a welcome reprieve from most of the villagers, so Annie struck up a conversation with her. Aisha, she said her name was. At least, I hope I'm saying that right. She said the irony of being a Muslim working at a Christmas decoration outlet was not lost on her, but the owner was apparently very nice, and the job had flexible hours, and you'd be surprised how respectful the villagers are compared to the folks in London. There may be a little ignorant, sure, but not hateful. Annie asked her about the Christmas music on the radio, and Aisha claimed not to have a clue what she was talking about. Aisha confessed to Annie that she was worried about the owner and stressed out about running the shop all on her own. The owner was one of Dunbar's missing 7. Holly Townsend was her name. Fittingly enough, she was the first one to go missing, Annie remembered. Annie admitted to Aisha that she was actually there to help look for the missing villagers, and Aisha actually... She cried. She insisted on waiting around the counter to give Annie a hug, knocking down several tacky ornaments in the process. She promised to help Annie in any way she could. Aisha just kept emphasizing how nice Holly was, hoping she was okay. Said she was going away on holiday for a week or two and to mind the store. I'll be back in a jiff. And that was the last Aisha ever heard from her. It wasn't unlike Holly to go on frequent sabbaticals like this. After all, Christmas year-round was just a retirement project. Most years they hardly turned a profit, and doing so at all was impressive enough on its own. Aisha only worked during the busy seasons, which, weirdly, July was, as well as the actual holiday season, of course. Annie asked her who was worth contacting out of Holly's network, which was sparse on paper. Aisha seemed to agree. Holly's husband George had passed away not too long ago, and her sister Donna was oddly unconcerned about the disappearance. Like, she didn't want to admit that Holly had been gone for 2.5 months longer than when she said she'd be back. Annie promised Aisha she'd speak to Donna to see if maybe she'd be more willing to speak to a stranger, and that she'd do her best to find Holly and everyone else. Not that there were many places in Dunbar for them to be hiding. And then, when she was getting ready to leave, Annie asked if she could freshen up in the washroom first. Aisha said, "Yes, of course, it's just right back there, but you'll have to forgive the mess because we're so small we end up having to store stock wherever we can find space, so you'll have some Christmas friends to keep you company in there." Annie laughed and said that was fine. She went to wash her face, and when she looked in the mirror, there was a huge statue she somehow hadn't noticed on the way in. Maybe because the door covered it when it swung in, so it wasn't revealed until you closed the door again. Annie thought most of the decorations were cute, but this one was just plain creepy. No, not creepy. It was terrifying. Like a child's nightmare. It was huge. Taller than Annie herself while bending over to use the sink. A skinny nutcracker soldier dressed up in a Santa outfit with a skinny long white beard. But something was off about the texture of it. It didn't look like wood or plastic. It was warped and wrinkled, hanging kind of loose, like it was actual skin. And when I looked at it, I swear, it winked at me. I distinctly remember the glisten in its eye from the light going away. Just for a second, like something moved over the shiny black eyes. Annie gasped and spun around, and then nothing was there. Like she imagined it. But then she looked back, and there it was, in the fucking mirror, looking back at her, somehow overriding her own reflection, and that horrible mouth with the clacking, gummy teeth swung open, and I swear it fucking spoke to me. It sounded like what you'd imagine Santa to sound like. Deep and bassy and cheery, but just plain wrong coming out of that thing. It asked me, warned me, not to dwell on the ghosts of Christmas past, and then it asked who would search if I went missing. I screamed, and it laughed, and I could feel myself disappear like I was a ghost. like I could see through my own skin. No! Stay back! Stay the fuck back! I woke up! When Annie came to, Aisha was outside the door, knocking, asking if everything was okay. Annie played it off, saying she was fine, opening the door and smiling to demonstrate it, saying that one of the Christmas figurines just startled her. That's all. But the Nutcracker Santa wasn't there. It was only fake fern trees and lights. Aisha laughed, saying how she agreed that they could be creepy, especially when she was in the store all alone by herself, and asked if Annie wanted to stay for tea. Annie thought she needed aspirin, coffee, Zoloft, something, but she had to leave. So she politely excused herself and said she still had a lot of work to do. Which was true. Annie had someone else to have tea with. The drive to Donna Beesbury's house felt like an eternity, with the rearview mirrors always threatening to show those horrible black eyes again. But nothing happened. And no Christmas music was playing on the radio, and the AC whined to keep Annie from melting into a puddle of her own sweat, so she got a grip. Donna Beesbury was a kindly woman, but Aisha was certainly correct about feeling off about the woman. She seemed to refuse to acknowledge the situation, brushing off her sister's disappearance as one of her moods, saying that sometimes she'd pout and spend the week in their family's cottage in the countryside. She had a dog called Snowball. Little yippy white thing with the crispy red eye stains. A Bichon Frise, maybe. Annie was never good with dog breeds. Donna explained it wasn't her dog. It was Holly's. And Donna got into the habit of watching her whenever Holly was throwing one of her tantrums. Annie tried, again and again, to explain the severity of the situation, but Donna wasn't having it. Her smile never wavered. She was giddy, cheerful to an impossible degree, laughing at simple statements like they were hilarious jokes. It was unnerving. Her smile started to chill Annie's blood, like it was the Nutcracker Santa again. Some waking nightmare. The inside of Donna's house reminded Annie of Christmas year-round, though the knickknacks tended towards angels and babies rather than Christmas characters. When Annie brought up George, Donna may as well have buried her head in the sand. She spoke around the subject, did anything to avoid acknowledging the fact that George was no longer with us. Diverted things by assuring Annie that George had always been such a Grinch, emphasizing that she never liked him terribly much and was glad that her own husband had to travel for work so often, leaving her with the house to herself much of the year. Throughout the entire unpleasant experience, Snowball seemed to be singularly focused on escape in the garden. She'd yip at something over the neighbor's fence and fling herself into the air, threatening to clear the top of it with a standing vertical that seemed impossible, given her stubby little legs. Annie couldn't help but empathize with the thing and wonder if she shouldn't be doing the same thing. Finally, Annie asked if Donna had a spare key to Holly's home and if she wouldn't mind perhaps lending it to Annie to see if she could find anything pertinent to the investigation. Surprisingly, Donna relented, even though the legality of Annie's question was dubious and a more cynical person would have known it. She merely suggested Annie could maybe give Holly's plants a water while she was there. The sun was low in the sky by the time Annie got to the Townsend residence. She was tired and hungry. But something told her that ending work for the day and going back to that empty inn room would have summoned the image of that fucking nutcracker again. She felt like a burglar creeping through their empty house. The decor was much like Donna's, with pictures painting an image of the late George Townsend that very much aligned with Donna's description. The bastard wasn't even smiling in their wedding photo. A hauntingly empty recliner sat facing the TV, the only piece of furniture that remained without a doily. Annie could imagine him gently rocking his life away here while Holly ran Christmas year-round. Nothing there was much help at first. Not until Annie leafed through an address book that had 2 home addresses labeled. One for where she currently stood, and one for an isolated cottage in the countryside. The same one Donna spoke of, sitting along the same access road that Kevin at the Elephant's Foot described his son starting his search at. Speaking of, as Annie closed things up at the Townsend residence, she ran into someone dragging their garbage can back inside next door. Kevin. The neighbors he had complained about were the Townsends. No wonder his son saw fit to go look for Holly. Annie remembered thinking he regarded her with a sort of grim bitterness this time, but seemed to let his guard down. "So the old bird let you in," he said to Annie, referring to Donna. Annie asked him what Holly and George's relationship was like. He said they were always fighting, sometimes even waking up his grandkids. The arguments would always end with Holly peeling out to go spend a few days in that blasted cottage. Apparently, after a particularly bad fight, Holly left for longer than usual. Throwing one of her tantrums, Donna had called it. It was him that discovered George's body, sitting in that same recliner. He only noticed because their bins had been sitting out for so long. That, and he saw Snowball leaping up for rescue in the window, barking her little heart out. Who knows how long he'd been sitting there when they finally came to scoop him up. Apparently, there was a smell. The EMS's best guess was that he had suffered a stroke. Holly wasn't returning anyone's calls. When she finally came home, Kevin said all she did was scoop up Snowball, drop her off at Donna's, and head right back to the cottage. "She's not missing," Kevin spat out. "Just playing pretend. But now my Jamie and the others actually are. And that witch knows what happened to them." Kevin said if he knew where it was, he'd barge in and give her a piece of his mind. Annie doubted that. But she could do it for him. It seems obvious the cops missed something there. No, that's not right. Annie didn't head for the cottage right away. She tried to wait for daylight. She did go back to the inn with the cute, chubby woman working the desk. But on the way there, she started to feel tired? That's not the right word. Wrong. Like she wasn't herself anymore. Like she was seeing things again. Annie remembered looking at her hand on the steering wheel, and it was... You could see right through it, like she was fading away. She could see the steering wheel of her car through the back of her hand. Turning felt hard, like the power steering was failing. When she got to the inn, it took all her strength to open the flimsy door. The bell rung, and the woman working the desk looked up and smiled, but her face went back to neutral. Confusion, like she couldn't see me. Annie tried talking to the woman, but she just ignored her, like she wasn't even there. She broke down, started screaming in the woman's face, anything to get her attention. But the only thing that worked was ringing the bell. That caused her to jump, look up and around, look at the door again, but she still couldn't see me. Annie set out on the road again, heading to the unmarked access road. She had to follow a paper map, like the old days. Her poor little sedan could scarcely handle the rough roads, but she had to drive onwards. The cottage. Everything would make sense when she found it. It was unsteady, between the road and using the overhead light to make out the map, but no one else was driving. 11 p.m. and Dunbar was fast asleep. Annie tried to ignore the fact that the map began to feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and that the steering wheel felt like it was locking up and that she could see through her hands. It would all make sense when she got there. Sure enough, the steering wheel went back to normal, and the map became light again, and Annie's hands weren't see-through. No. They had flesh and blood and veins, like always. It was just her eyes playing tricks on her again. Annie had thought she was done with that sort of thing when she became a teenager, that she grew out of it. But she supposed she may have been predisposed to stressful visions like this all along. And then Annie realized that it shouldn't be so cold. Shouldn't be so dark. It was still July, but she saw snowflakes drift down, and suddenly the car's wheels were bogged down in a thick snowbank. Annie stepped out and heard her foot quietly crunch on the snowfall, felt the wind whip snowflakes down her neck, and she was somewhere else. And she made some new friends, and they all lived happily ever after. Good, right? Right? Come on, you guys liked it, didn't you? You'll... No! You said you wouldn't call him here. I was good. Wasn't I? It was a good story. Please. I can tell it again. I could be more convincing. I can make it happier.
Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.
This episode was written and directed by Alex Valentino and edited by D.V. Clarke. Annie was played by Cordy Fell. Additional editing by Hiko Zillette. This episode was announced by Alexander Hanley, with musical theme by Onlooker Air, and cover art by OddOblivion. This episode of Black Sheep Shipping is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license. Thanks for listening.